It's the Happy Families Podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
Parents are increasingly telling me that their children are dysregulated. So today, a conversation about what it means to be regulated or dysregulated emotionally. Hello, I'm Dr. Justin Coulson. I'm here with my wife and mum to our 6, sometimes regulated and sometimes not so regulated, slightly dysregulated children. Mrs. Happy Families, Kylie, lots to talk about with emotions today.
Well, why don't we start with emotions? What are they?
Emotions are data. Emotions are information. And sometimes we use that data really well. Other times, though, either the data is faulty or our response to the data is faulty and we take it as some kind of eternal truth and we live and die by those emotions. And sometimes that's functional, other times it's not. Sometimes it's quite maladaptive. But ultimately, we see emotions as the way things really are, which is problematic because when we become more and more emotional, we see things more and more myopically, and that leads to, it leads to looking at the world through some very emotional glasses that don't always reflect the reality that's in front of us. The etymology of the word emotion, I love this. The etymology, that is where the word comes from French émotion or émouvoir, which means to excite. But like traditionally it was Latin, which meant, and I don't speak Latin, but émouvere, I think, E-M-O-V-E-R-E, which basically means to move. So emotions literally are to move. So there's this psychological movement. And I really love that Latin root of the word emotion because when we feel emotional, we feel moved, if you know what I mean. I guess the one other thing that I would say in answering your question, what is it to be emotional? Some researchers look at emotion on 2 dimensions. They look at the pleasantness dimension and also the energetic dimension. So you can have high pleasant emotions and low pleasant emotions or unpleasant emotions, and you can have high energy and low energy emotions. And you can put that into a little 2x2 with energy and emotion as the X and Y axis. And all of a sudden you've got this really cool way of grouping emotion. So if I was to say to you, what's a highly pleasant, highly energetic emotion, you would say?
Excitement.
Absolutely. And if I was to say, what's a highly unpleasant, highly energetic emotion?
Anger.
Great. Okay. Livid, being hostile, just blowing up, explosiveness. Conversely, we could look at low energy, low pleasantness.
Sadness.
Yeah. Okay. And we can also have low energy but high pleasantness.
Peace.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I like that one. I was thinking of bliss, but either I'll take either of them. They're the kind of, once you get into your 30s, 40s, 50s, they're the ones that you really like. Yeah. Low energy, highly pleasant. Kids, on the other hand, they really like the high energy ones all the time. And it doesn't matter if it's highly unpleasant or highly pleasant, just so long as it's high energy, they're happy. So that's kind of what emotions are, I guess, would be my definition of them. I guess one other thing to highlight is that every emotion serves a purpose. So we don't have good emotions and bad emotions. A lot of people will say, oh, that's just a bad emotion. I'm really uncomfortable with that language.
Or it's not okay to be angry.
Yeah, but context is everything because sometimes an emotion is out of place. It doesn't belong where it is. So it might be really maladaptive. I'll give you a really simple example. The kids being hyper excited right before bed. It's just not the right time to have that emotion. It's still a healthy emotion, but it's not adaptive. It's not functional. There's a time and a place. And one of the challenges that we have with emotional expression and emotional regulation and dysregulation is helping kids to be social. I mean, ultimately, emotions are about being socialized. Sometimes people are like, you shouldn't have to suppress your emotions. But when we had a trip to the Gold Coast a few months ago, Kylie, I don't know if you were with me as I was walking through Woolworths picking up some groceries. I think you were with the kids. But there was a lady in aisle 6 who was being her authentic self. She was not suppressing her emotions at all. She was letting the entire supermarket know exactly how she felt. And it was not appropriate. Like it was, everyone got out of aisle 6. No one wanted to be near her. It was dysfunctional. It was dysregulated. It was maladaptive. And it obviously came at a cost.
So you're using these words, dysregulation and regulated emotion. What is it exactly? What does it mean to be regulated?
Okay, yeah, I'm glad you want to know about regulation first because that's the goal. That's what we're really working towards with our children. Emotional regulation is the ability to control your emotional state in service of your goals. I want to say that again because it matters a lot. It's not just about controlling your emotions, because sometimes you want to control them and suppress them, and other times you need to express them. But what we really want to consider is, what am I working towards here in terms of the quality of the relationship that I have with the person I'm engaging with, or with myself? What am I working towards in terms of work, or getting the house organized, or getting kids into the car? How is my emotional expression going to serve me in getting to my goals? Do I need to suppress, or do I need to express, and in what way? So emotion regulation is controlling your emotions in such a way that you can use them healthily and adaptively in service of your goals.
I'm curious about the concept of controlling your emotional state in service of your goals. You've said that, right?
Right.
So I had a situation where somebody decided they needed to speak their truth.
Oh, sorry, tangent. Speak their truth. What that means is, I'm going to say something that you're not going to like. It's got nothing to do with truth. It means I'm feeling emotional about something, and my choice is to not suppress that in service of my goal to have a healthy, happy relationship, but rather to express my opinion, my emotion, because I think I'll feel better once I've got it out.
And that's exactly what it was.
And it's a real lack of emotional intelligence, because I cannot think of a single time anyone has expressed their truth to me. Express my truth, like capital T truth or little t truth. Anyway, I've never gone, oh, I really needed that truth. Thank you so much. Like, I feel so much better as a person about myself right now. Come on. Like, we've got to stop saying stuff like that. Seriously. Anyway, go on.
But that's my point. She wanted to speak her truth, and the service of her goal is honesty.
Okay.
Right? So her goal is, I'm an honest person, and in order for me to be able to move forward, I actually need to be honest with you about this situation. But the reality is, whether I knew the truth or not in that situation, it had nothing to do with me and everything to do with her.
Yeah.
So how does that play out when as adults, we're trying to be emotionally regulated?
Yeah. So maybe another definition that's often used when it comes to the idea of emotion regulation is simply the ability to control your emotional state. Now, I add the in service of your goals element because I trust that most people are working towards having civil and social and positive, energizing, life-giving interactions with the people around them, and that they want to do well.
That's very generous.
It is generous of me.
It's very generous of you.
I'm a capacious kind of guy, all right? But some people are the opposite. Some people are capricious, and their goals, even there though, a person who is not thinking about the long term, they may feel that if they just share their quote unquote truth, if I just share my truth, it's going to make everything better. The goal is still to make things better. It's just that the goal is misguided. It's misaligned, and therefore it's not going to it's not going to be successful.
If that's what emotional regulation is, what is dysregulation, and what does it look like?
Yeah, so dysregulation is when your emotions...
I have a fair idea.
When you're not controlling your emotional state. I mean, that's kind of it. But I want to go a bit deeper on it, because the more I've thought about this idea of dysregulation, and I don't know if you'll find this in a textbook so much, but the way I look at it is, it's when your emotions are stronger than your ability to act with autonomy.
Yeah, so...
And the key word there for me is, and that's why I've added it, you don't find that in the textbooks, but the ability to act with autonomy around your emotions. When you are dysregulated, you've stopped choosing.
Yeah, I love that. And one of our daughters would actually say to me, when she would get to a point where her emotions were so big, and we kind of looked at it like Jekyll and Hyde. She was so calm and controlled most of the time. And then she would just have this massive explosion.
Boom.
And after she'd had the explosion, then she had all of the guilt associated with it, because it was so not who she was. And she would say to me, I just don't have any control in that moment. It would overpower her. So I love how you've articulated that, because I've seen it and I've obviously lived it in my own life.
You know what? I mean, sometimes I'm just such an idiot, right? I'm a parenting expert. I've got a PhD in psychology. I'm supposed to know all this and get it right. But last week on Friday, we were talking about how we had this trip. It was overseas, and on the way home, we ended up getting stuck. We had 3 transfers to do anyway, right? But then the airline diverted from Brisbane because of fog, and we had to go into Sydney and then into Canberra before we could finally get back to Brisbane. It meant that we spent approximately 42 hours in transit, and I only got about 3 hours sleep because I don't sleep on planes. Now, my ability to choose my emotions by the time we got to Thursday night or Friday night or whatever it was, I was an absolute mess. I was a disaster. And I actually got explosive. And that's what a dysregulated brain does. It moves into fight or flight, becomes completely dysfunctional. Responses are completely disproportionate to the context or to the goals that we have. I wanted to have good relationships with my family, but something happened and I just blew up. And why did I blow up? Well, I was so emotionally dysregulated because I was so physically dysregulated. It was just the worst. So dysregulated brains tend to be explosive or withdrawn, right? Go into the bedroom and hide, not talking to anybody, which probably brings us to parenting and us and our kids and big emotions.
You started the podcast saying that more and more parents are saying that their kids are struggling with emotional dysregulation.
Yeah. And a lot of parents that I talk to about this are blaming it on resilience. They're saying, if my kids were more resilient, then they wouldn't be so emotional. And
you're obviously suggesting that that's not the case.
Well, sometimes they're right. Sometimes it is a resilience issue. And in some ways, just the ability to exert that control comes down to how we're able to control our environment and be resilient. But I think often this is a misdiagnosis.
I'm thinking about when our kids have been the most dysregulated, and more times than not, it's when they're young, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Emotion regulation develops across time. It starts at around about the age 3. Like 2-year-olds, anyone who's ever had a 2-year-old knows they struggle so much to regulate their emotions. Once they get going or once something doesn't work out their way, just kaboom, they don't have the capacity to regulate.
And so they actually need us to be the calm influence so that they can kind of borrow that calm. Yeah, they catch our
predictability,
calm.
Safety, exactly. They catch our calm. What age do you reckon that developmental process starts to get to a point where kids can, in most situations, regulate their emotions?
I was going to say, does it ever happen?
Okay, so I mean, obviously, I'm nearly 50 years old, and it happened to me last week because I was tired and jet lagged and whatever else. But
look, I would say anywhere between, depending on the child, but between 8 and 10, is where you'd start to see some good control.
And when I'm talking to school teachers and I ask this question, they all kind of go, yeah, the first couple of years of school are really hard, but by around grade 2 or grade 3, they get it together. And most research points to somewhere around the age of 9. But there's a whole lot of other stuff going on, right? They're supposed to get better at regulation as they get older, but they'll still have plenty of struggles just like adults. And you can probably think of a few reasons why.
We'd go tired, hungry, stressed, lonely, bored.
Yeah. And then there's medical conditions or just being jet lagged, or maybe they've got ADHD or there's some other kind of neurodiversity going on. And what happens is kids, when they get dysregulated, they enter fight or flight mode. They struggle to cope. They do not listen to reason because I've said this for years, high emotions, low intelligence, right? We're in a different part of the brain now. When children experience acute stress, they usually are just really, really highly reactive, just like you or I as an adult. No pause, not considering anything logical, not considering long-term goals. Why? Dysregulated. So you end up with the biting and the kicking and the swearing and the spitting and the crying and the clenching fists and the slamming of the doors. That's classic fight mode.
So, I've never actually thought about it, but toddlers obviously are a perfect case study of this, but I've never thought of it as fight mode. But when they get really worked up, they do. They just want to fight, right?
That's exactly what it is. And what's really going on is the frontal lobe shuts down. That's the part of the brain that does the thinking and the planning. Of course, with the toddler, they don't even really have a frontal lobe. It's barely there. The amygdala, that triggers survival mode. And so kaboom, it all happens. The brain's alarm system sends out a false alarm, triggers survival instinct, and then it's fight or flight. And kids just don't access the higher cognitive function like reasoning and decision making. It just doesn't happen. So as parents, we've got some really big challenges when it comes to children and their dysregulated emotions, but so much of it is developmentally appropriate. And our job is to help them through those years from 3 to 9 to slowly, very slowly develop the emotional regulation they need.
But big emotions, they're normal. And healthy. It's really important for us to be able to express our emotions.
We are first and foremost emotional beings. Now, that's not necessarily in our best interest, but first and foremost, we're emotional beings, and then we are rational beings second. I love this quote from Brené Brown. She says, when something difficult happens, emotion is at the wheel cognition and behavior are bound and gagged in the trunk, and emotion is driving. And that's kind of what's going on. I mean, it's such a really, I love the metaphor. When we spoke with Lisa D'Amore on the Happy Families podcast a little while ago, in the episode that we shared with her, she said two brilliant things about emotions. Number one, sometimes our kids, and sometimes us as well, become regulated by expressing emotions in a dysregulated way. So we've got to work through the dysregulation. And I remember when we had young kids, Kylie, every now and again, you would just say, this baby will not go to sleep. And it pained both of us, but you would sometimes just put the baby in the cot for 5 or 10 minutes and they would scream their lungs out. And we'd sit there going, oh my goodness, what are we doing? But once they'd had a big scream, we'd pick them up. They felt safe and secure. They'd have a feed and they would go to sleep perfectly. Now, we're not recommending that you do that every night or anything like that, but from time to time, you would say sometimes they just need to scream. And that's that whole Lisa D'Amore thing. Sometimes when you're dysregulated, you just have to be dysregulated to work through the dysregulation and pull it back together. And the second thing she said is that, and this is picking up on the whole Brené Brown idea, emotions should have a seat at the table of your cognitive board of directors, but they don't chair the board. It's our job to make sure that they're not chairing the board.
Recently, you were having some Spanish lessons.
Sí.
You came across, you wanted to say, I'm hungry.
Oh, yes.
And when you looked at the translation, it wasn't I am hungry, it was I have hunger.
Yeah.
And the difference between associating the emotion with who you are and the acknowledgement that what you have is an emotion is a really important differentiation.
Yeah, so instead of saying I am hungry, in Spanish they would say Tengo hambre. And Tengo means I have. So if I was to say no tengo pesos, I'd be saying I don't have any pesos. So I would say Tengo hambre. I'm hungry, but it's not actually I'm hungry. It's I have hunger. In other words, I am not this emotion. I'm not angry or I'm not sad. I have sadness. And I love that because it means that it comes and it goes. It's not always with us. And that idea of Tengo hambre, I think it's beautiful. Anyway, we need to wrap up. So let's share just a couple of quick ideas about what we can do if we want the kids to regulate well. First thing, recognize the developmental realities. If they're aged between 3 and 9, the younger they are, the harder it is for them to do the emotional work of regulating their emotions. They're going to spend more time dysregulated when things aren't working out. Number 2, be regulated yourself. You're laughing. I don't know if you're laughing at me or laughing at you, but you're thinking about last week when I lost it.
No,
right?
I'm laughing about it all.
Right.
Because the reality is
it's hard.
Probably the hardest thing we do as parents when our children's emotions are massive is actually being self-regulated.
Right, because emotions are contagious.
So you make it sound like it's just a really easy checkpoint. We just need to be
just go through the list.
Ourselves.
Just regulate yourself. You'll be fine. Okay, they're kids. They're going to lose it. Your job is to go, you're a kid. You're losing it. I get it. It's not a problem. That's the job, right? Number 3, the more that you can create a predictable and safe environment, the better it is for your kids. If the environment is unpredictable and unsafe, you wire your kids for stress, which means that they're highly reactive and they spend more time dysregulated. Now, that doesn't mean that we need to make the environment completely safe all the time. Research shows that kids do need to have some unpredictability and they especially need to do stuff that's risky. That helps them to manage their emotions really well when they're involved in risky play. Really healthy for them.
But I think that it's different. It's about being emotionally safe, yeah?
Yeah, it is.
So one thing that I've really, really noticed since we've brought Emily home from school and she's now homeschooling is that she's so much calmer. She is so much calmer. And the reality is I'm not doing things perfectly by any stretch.
But the environment feels so much more safe and predictable for her.
She feels so much more connected to me, but calmer because there's predictability in the emotions within our space.
Yeah, we expect so little of our kids physically in 2024 and so much of our kids emotionally. And we've got it the wrong way around. We should expect a little less of them emotionally because they're kids and they're still learning how to regulate. And we should be letting them go and do so much more physically. Like get outside and take risks and have fun and climb trees and ride skateboards and go to the park on your own because you're 8 Like, go and do that. Now, I know context is everything, so please don't have a heart attack if you live in a place where you couldn't let your 8-year-old do that. But we can let it. Anyway, I digress. Last thing, hold the line. We need to we need to really be compassionate, but we've got to hold the line, have boundaries, but be really kind to our kids. And if we can do those things, then they're going to get better and better at emotional regulation over time. They'll be less dysregulated, and less parents are going to be saying to me, my kids are so dysregulated, what do I do?
I think you've left something off the list, though.
Oh, what have I forgotten?
Well, it's not. It is actually on the list.
Oh, okay.
But you talk about us needing to be regulated ourselves.
Yeah.
It has so much to do with how we model what it looks like to be emotionally regulated, to allow them to see us with our big emotions working through it. They don't need us to be happy and cheerful all the time.
Yep.
That doesn't help them at all. They actually need to see us working through some really big emotions. Because
in a regulated way where we're taking autonomy and control and looking after ourselves.
Yeah, they need to see that because they need to know, number one, it's okay to have those emotions. And number two, there is a better way to get through it than kicking and screaming.
Hope this has been a helpful conversation. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rulon from Bridge Media. If you'd like more information about making your family happy, we'd love for you to reach out to us. happyfamilies.com.au. Just go to the website, click on the podcast link and leave us a message asking us your questions that we will do our best to answer on the pod. Tomorrow doing exactly that, answering your questions on the Happy Families podcast.